Section 6.3, Factor trinomials by grouping, continuation. Looking at the trinomial that we're given on the board, 24x squared minus 42x plus 9, we need to look to see, is there a greatest common factor we can divide out of all three terms? And there is. We can divide the GCF of 3 out of all three terms. 24 divided by 3 is 8. So we have 8x squared. Bring down the minus sign. 42x divided by 3 is 14x. Plus 9 divided by 3 is 3. Remember, whenever we take a GCF out in the beginning of the problem, we have to make sure that we include that GCF in our final answer. So we know that 3 is going to be part of our final answer. Let's look at what's inside parentheses to see if we can break this trinomial down any further. If you look at the term with the variable squared, you can see the coefficient in front of the variable squared is not 1. To factor this, we're going to take the first coefficient times the third. 8 times 3 is 24. What two factors with the same sign, because the third term's positive, will give us a product of 24 and a sum of negative 14 when both factors have a negative sign? So we're looking for two numbers that have the same sign, and the middle term tells us both factors have to be negative. The factors we need to use are 12 and 2. 12 times 2 is 24. 12 plus 2 is 14. When we go to split this middle term, we always bring down the term furthest to the left, which is 8x squared. Minus, it does not matter if we write negative 12 first or negative 2 first. We will get the same answer. I'm going to randomly write negative 2 first, and then I have to attach an x to the negative 2 because the middle term has an x. Then I'm going to write the factor negative 12 and attach an x to negative 12 because once again, the middle term has an x. Lastly, we bring down the third term, which is plus 3. Once we rewrite that middle term using two factors, our next step is to factor by grouping. We group together the first and the second term. Looking at 8x squared and negative 2x, our greatest common factor is 2x. Once we find the GCF, we divide it out. 8x squared divided by 2x is 4x. Negative 2x divided by 2x is just negative 1. Bring down the sign of the third term, which is negative, and then we're going to group together the last two terms, 12x and 3. 12x and 3 have a GCF of 3. Our next step is divide out the 3. However, we have to be careful with the sign of 3. 3 is negative, so we're dividing negative 3 out of each term. Negative 12x divided by negative 3 is positive 4x. 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1. At our checkpoint, you can see our GCF is 4x minus 1. Once we indicate what the GCF is, now we can divide it out of both terms. When we divide it out of the first term, we're left with 2x. And when we divide 4x minus 1 out of the second term, we're left with negative 3. So our answer is 4x minus 1 times 2x minus 3. If we look at one more example in this section, you can see now that we added a negative to our leading exponent. So the leading exponent is the term of greatest degree, the largest exponent. Remember, back in section 6.1, we learned that when the term of greatest degree, which is the term with the largest exponent, is negative, our GCF has to be negative. So to begin this problem, we're going to factor out a negative GCF. What number is the largest number that divides into 18, 15, and 75? That number is 3. In addition to that, all three terms have the variable x. So we're going to take the variable with the least exponent, which is x cubed. Once we find that GCF, we're going to go ahead and divide it out of all three terms. Negative 18 divided by negative 3 is positive 6. We write the x one time and we subtract the exponents. 5 minus 3 is 2. Let's divide again. Negative 15 divided by negative 3 is positive 5. We write the base x one time, and when we subtract the exponents, 4 minus 3 is 1. Lastly, when we go to divide 75x cubed divided by negative 3x cubed, 75 divided by negative 3 is negative 25, and our x cubes will cancel. X to the third power divided by x to the third power is 1. Once again, we need to include the GCF in our final answer. So I like to highlight or underline the GCF so I don't forget to include it at the very end. Looking at what's inside the parentheses, 6x squared plus 5x minus 25. We need to factor this trinomial and break it down. How do we break it down? Let's look at the term with the variable squared. You can see that the number in front of it is not 1. Therefore, we need to take the first coefficient times the third. 6 times 25 is 150. So we're looking for two factors that have different signs because the third term is negative. That will give us a product of 150 and a difference of 5, because when we add numbers with opposite signs, we have to subtract. The numbers that we need to use are positive 15 and negative 10. 15 times 10 is 150. 15 minus 10 is 5. Once we find the two factors, we're going to rewrite this middle term, 5x, using positive 15 and negative 10. Let's bring down the first term, which is 6x squared. When I go to rewrite this 5x, it does not matter if I write positive 15 first or negative 10 first. We will get the same answer either way. I'm going to randomly select 15, and then I have to attach an x to the positive 15. Then I'm going to write the integer negative 10, and I'm going to attach an x. Lastly, we bring down the negative 25. Once we have that middle term rewritten, now let's factor by grouping. When we group together our first two terms, 6x squared and 15x, the greatest common factor is 3x. Once we find that GCF, we divide it out. 6x squared divided by 3x is 2x. 15x divided by 3x is 5. We always bring down the sign of the third term. Once again, the third term is negative, so let's bring down the sign. Once again, the third term is negative, so let's bring down the sign. Once we do, we group together the last two terms and we find the GCF. 10x and 25 have a GCF of 5. Be careful when we divide out the 5, it's negative. Negative 10x divided by negative 5 is positive 2x. And negative 25 divided by negative 5 is positive 5. At our checkpoint, we can see the GCF is 2x plus 5. Once we find that GCF, our next step is just to divide it out of each term. So when we divide the GCF out of our first term, we're left with 3x. And when we divide it out of the second term, we're left with minus 5. So our final answer is 2x plus 5 times 3x minus 5. And then we're done.